Hi, this is Jaytech coming back with video 3 for this new series for Sonic Academy. In this video, we're going to take the musical essence that we just crafted in the last video and use it to expand into a kick and bass combo that will form the basis of the track. Very important, of course, and it will serve as a foundation for all of the elements that are still to come. Let's dive in. So we've crafted our initial musical essence, at least a very sort of quick sketch of how it's all going to go down musically in the rest of the song. And the next thing I would generally focus on in a project like this is how that is going to combine with, you know, your groove and your drums and your basses and everything. To me, it's easier to do the chords and the melodies and stuff, and then, you know, map out the section where that's going to be expressed with a drum beat and basses behind it. And then do these sort of intro and outro trance sections where everything's in the root note. It's easier to do it that way than the other way around. Because if you start with this root note, sometimes you find that the instruments that you pick don't necessarily work so well when you start, you know, running a whole bunch of different notes through them. So that's why I do it sort of, you know, the punchline of the song first and then figure out these ravey trance sections later. So I'm going to give you a quick play of what we're going to craft in this, which to me is the other musical essence of this song. And then a quick little variation over here where the notes are cut up a bit more. You get the idea. So the first thing I'll point out is that, you know, earlier on in the song, some of these notes went down low, but you can actually see here that some of these notes are actually, that would have otherwise been the lowest notes in the pattern, have actually been put up an octave. And that's because sometimes these bass notes, these bass instruments don't like to reach down so low. And so sometimes I'll just copy that progression, but then maybe if there's a note that's too low, I'll just pop it up an octave. So this is kind of like what you hear through the wall of the club. This is kind of, this is the, you know, the spine, if you will, of the song when everyone's raving and everyone's dancing. And it's arguably the most important thing, even though there's like a whole bunch of story being told on top of it. So, you know, how do we sort of pick these sounds and how do we craft these sections? So I'm going to give you just a quick refresh of what we made in the last video. And I have sort of taken the original song section for the moving forward for the videos so that the song sort of does take shape in exactly the same, it sounds the same. So it's interesting that we're sort of working from the middle outwards. I know a lot of times people start from the left and then they sort of hit a wall going to the right. So this can be a good way to sort of like do the heart of the song first and build out like we discussed. Picking a kick. I'm actually going to switch gears a little bit here and I'm going to go over to Splice and I'm going to search for kicks. Let's say one shot. They're kicks. These are ones that I've sort of bought at some point, but they're in the cloud. But I'm just going to audition some of these sounds. Some of these are top kicks. This cashmere stuff is great. I love this Seven Skies kick. But say, for example, I had never heard this before. I could be playing this in a vacuum, in isolation, and I'd be like, that's great. I really like that. I like the sound of that kick just listening to it in my studio. That's how I pick kicks, right? And so every now and then I'll go shopping and that's the only criteria I have is I play it and I go, ooh, yeah, that's nice. And then I throw them all into a drum rack, which in this case is called 2019 Kicks. And here are like, you know, 16 or so of my favorite kicks that I use again and again and again. And what they all have in common is that they're all kicks that sort of sparked joy for me and that I liked the sound of them playing by themselves. And so when I use this kick rack in a song, invariably, they just tend to sort of gel with whatever I'm doing because they're kicks that are automatically to my taste. It saves me going through hundreds and hundreds of them. I don't always use this rack because sometimes it is good to get out of your own, usual processes and do different things. But in the case of this song, I'm going to throw that Seven Skies kick in there. Make sure it's not too loud, always good. When auditioning new sounds in Ableton, make sure you pull that volume right down so you don't hurt your ears. And when I'm picking the kick at this stage of the song, I'm actually going to put it over the rest of the breakdown. And the reason for that, even though it's not going to be playing in the breakdown, it at least helps me level the kick with the breakdown, which helps me avoid having, the groove/rave sections either too loud or too quiet versus the volume levels of the breakdown. It's a very common mix problem that the breakdown is either too loud or too quiet compared to the rest of the song. So I'm just going to throw that kick in there. Spoiler alert, this is actually the kick that I used for this song, so I know that it's going to work with the song. Generally, I would audition a few, and I'd sort of go up and down this rack and just play it with the song. A lot of these kicks are now marked with their fundamental frequency that they're in. If you want to have your kick in tune with the rest of the song, that's fine. If you're not even sure if it's in tune with the song or not, that's actually okay too. Like if it sounds good with the song, just roll with it. So we have a kick, and I'm not going to do anything else to the kick in this song because, I know that that's a great sounding kick. I know that I can rely on this kick to do what it's supposed to do. And so really it's up to the rest of the sounds to fall in line with this kick drum, so I don't need to do any crazy surgery on it. So the next thing I'm going to do is just add a simple sub bass. I do this with Serum, but anything that can generate a sine wave is fine, i.e. most software synthesizers nowadays. But I use Serum because it tends to sort of, just have all these fun options, and it tends to do everything very nicely, very easily. So I'm just using the sub oscillator in Serum, and I'm taking this chord progression that we, this one note bass line, which defines the message of the whole song. Let's have a listen. It's too high. I can turn that down an octave. You could do that. That's about as low as you want to go with a sub bass right there. But for this, I'm going a bit higher, but maybe these can go down. The lower you go down with sub bass, the harder it's going to be to hear on small systems. So you always want to think about what people are going to hear on laptops. There are a lot of songs where the sub bass, drives the song, and that works on a big system. But then when you play it on a phone, it sounds like the song has no bass. So the sub bass shouldn't be driving the song. It shouldn't be the center of gravity of the bass. It should be the one end of the spectrum, so to speak. I'm going to make these eighth notes, and that's basically like sort of strumming a rock guitar. That's the feeling we're going for, especially once we pair everything up with a little electric guitar sound, which we're going to do next. And then I'm leaving one beat of space at the end of each phrase, and that's for this drop section. It's so that there's a bit of just room to breathe. It's like taking a breath before the next phrase. And I can hear that those notes have gone out of time just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just copy those from the section where it did work properly. So we're laying groundwork so that when we actually start to do some of the heavy lifting, it all gets it's a bit easier to write it and for it all to come together. This is a simple sidechain compression, which I use again and again. Stole these parameters from Matt Fax. That's why it's called Fax Chain. And that's just reading the kick. And there's plenty of sort of stuff on Ableton sidechain compression out there, so I won't go too heavily into that, but just a bit of sidechain so that it pumps. And I should actually read the new kick that I've just created. Reasonably strong ratio and reasonably short attack and release are usually a good rule of thumb with sidechain compression. Tweak it to taste, and with Ableton, you can sort of watch that gain reduction pumping and get a feel for how it's pumping. Or you can look at this little curve here in this section, and you can see how it's sort of grooving along. Such an important part of dance music. So most of my tracks have a sub bass and then a main bass. And the reason that I do that is that like a lot of the awesome bass sounds that you pick don't actually have a very strong sub bass component. So by having an extraordinarily simple sub bass being done by a sine wave, it leaves me a bit of room to have a bit more fun with my main bass and focus more on its mid-range. So I think I use this Banana Man preset. That actually has a pretty nice sub bass. But a lot of the time when I'm picking a bass line, it's you can solo out those sub frequencies and realize that it's not hitting very well. So because I do have those frequencies covered by that sub layer, I'm going to take some of these sub frequencies out with a filter. The reason for that is that the lower down in the frequency spectrum you go, the less stuff you can have happening at the same time. Nice. Something that's always fun in the delicious Sonic Academy ANA2, ANA2 synth, as if it weren't awesome enough that they have this cool online Netflix for music production videos type website. They also make this great synth. It's my favorite synth. Just throw that sidekick on, instant sidechain. Just make sure to turn that dry wet on that sidechain off whenever the kick isn't playing, because otherwise it will sound a bit funny. It'll sound like it's getting out of the way of a kick that isn't there. I'll take out some of those very top frequencies because they sound a bit geeky as well. You could probably also do this in the synth. I'm going to double that up. Something I often do when layering, just Control or Command D, adding an entire extra layer of the same thing, and then just pick a different preset. That will also have the added benefit of copying the dry wet of this. Although, yeah, I always recommend just before you finish a song, make sure all your side chains are switched on when they're supposed to be on. If they're an automatic one, and they're not reading a kick like an LFO tool, anything like that, just make sure it's switched off when it's supposed to be switched off. So, fun preset in here called Doom Slayer, and it's sort of like instant electric guitar feel. And I will actually have to dial that in, that insert for the sidekick again. So now that should switch off at the right place. Three layers of that bass line that are all doing very different, separate, distinct things that are all coming together to create one wall of sound. The sub bass is super easy and casual and relaxed. The main bass is clean, and then I'm adding a bit of grit and a bit of rockiness with this electric guitar. Nice. In the next video, we're going to work on the trance stack to go along with this kick and bass combo, so stay tuned.